If you were anything like me growing up, you had an Xbox 360. You and the boys would get home from school at the ripe old age of 8, and you'd play Halo 3 custom games for 6 hours before your mum made you go to bed. There were some kids at school that had PlayStations, but those kids were cringe. You mean your console doesn't have Halo? Then what's the point of even playing video games? What? But little did I know that me and my buddies were in the minority. The PlayStation 3 actually outsold the Xbox 360. And in Europe, you know, where I live, the Xbox was dramatically outsold by PlayStation. In fact, this article from 2007 says that 20% of all PlayStation sales were made in the UK. But that didn't matter to me. My tiny 8-year-old ADHD riddled brain just wanted to play Halo. No Halo, no buy. And at the time, this felt like such a big deal. This argument between which was the better console felt like an all-out war, which is where the argument gets its name from. The console wars. By the way, just as an aside, the PlayStation 3 clearly was the better console. It didn't have Halo, but the Xbox 360 was a terrible console. It was propped up single-handedly by the existence of Bungie and their Halo games. The Xbox 360 had a failure rate of 54%, which was dramatically higher than both the PlayStation and the Nintendo Wii. But despite all that, this competition raged on, and is still raging on to this day. A big strategy of the console wars comes from exclusives. Each console will have a handful of exclusive titles that no other consoles can have. PlayStation has God of War, Uncharted, Bloodborne, Spider-Man, The Last of Us, enormous titles that give tons of pulling power towards their console. Xbox has Halo and Gears of War, and in fact that's actually it in terms of games that people actually care about. But it's still enough for some players to choose Xbox over the PlayStation. Exclusives are what draws a new user into picking one console over another. If price is no issue to the user, then the only thing that they'll look at is the games that the console has to offer. And as it stands right now, Sony wins that battle. But once you've bought your console, there's another layer to look into. If I buy a new shiny PlayStation, but all of my friends have the new Xbox instead, I can't play games with them. There's no cross-platform play between the two consoles. And this single fact sells consoles. If your buddies all have the same console, you're more likely to buy it too, because you don't want to miss out on any multiplayer experiences that you could have had otherwise. So if exclusives get you in the door, big multiplayer games get you to pressure your friends into buying the thing that you bought. The console wars are being fought with extraordinary firepower. There is billions of dollars being thrown around in an attempt to steal players away from their competitors. But most people probably don't realize that this fight is extremely lopsided. Sony is the company that makes PlayStation. They are a huge company, no doubt, and they have a market cap of $108 billion, which is huge amounts of money to throw around in an attempt to win this console war. But Xbox is owned by Microsoft. Microsoft's market cap is about $2 trillion. Trillion! Not billion, not with a B, trillion. They completely and utterly blow their opponent out of the water in terms of buying power, and they constantly throw their cash around to make sure that Sony knows about it. Microsoft recently bought Activision Blizzard for $68 billion. That is the biggest purchase in the gaming industry's history. They spent almost 2/3 of Sony's entire market cap on buying Activision Blizzard, because $68 billion is chump change to a tech Goliath like Microsoft. They also bought Bethesda and id Software, and this allows Xbox to have a ton of huge games from huge developers sitting exclusively on their own consoles. If you want to play any Bethesda game in future, you better buy an Xbox, because they won't be on PlayStation. Sony hasn't got nearly as much money as Microsoft to be able to do stuff like this, so instead of buying big, they have to buy smart. Sony recently announced a purchase of Bungie for $3.6 billion. Literally pennies to Microsoft, but it's still a very clever purchase, because the price of buying Bungie is relatively low, but they have beloved games and a beloved brand. And that just might be enough to fight against the titans that Microsoft has purchased. But unfortunately for Sony, buying companies isn't the only trick up Microsoft's sleeve, because Microsoft also has the Xbox Game Pass, where you can pay a monthly subscription to get access to a giant catalogue of games, just for a small fee a month. This is such insane value for money that you might be wondering how they can even make a profit off of it. Well, the answer is that they don't make a profit off of it. The Xbox Game Pass doesn't make a profit. It loses money every quarter, and has been doing so for a very long time. Not to mention that Xbox sells their consoles at a loss, They rely exclusively on the Game Pass, Xbox Live, and console exclusives to make their money back on the loss they take from selling their consoles. And for the longest time, PlayStations were also being sold at a loss. The reason they're willing to do this is because the real money is made on selling services. PlayStation Plus and Xbox Live, Game Pass and console exclusives, this is where the money is. They're willing to get their hardware into your home at a loss for their company if it means that you'll be a long-term customer. And this was even true back in the day. DLCs on Xbox Live cost you Microsoft points. If you wanted the new Call of Duty maps or the new Left 4 Dead maps, you had to pay Microsoft $10. In fact, Valve was willing to release the Left 4 Dead maps for free, and that's what they did on PC. But Microsoft didn't allow them to do this because they didn't like the precedent it set. So the Left 4 Dead maps were free day one on Steam, but it cost money day one on Xbox Live. So you might be wondering, hey H2, who do you think is going to win the console wars? Well, keep it on the down low. It's a pretty big secret, but I'll tell you who wins. It's you. You win. All of this fierce competition creates a great environment for gamers to get great deals. The real winner of the console wars is the consumer, because this competition creates competitive prices. Things like Xbox Live and PS Plus would cost 10 times the price they currently do if that was the only way that you could play console games online. They have to keep their prices low so that you don't switch over to their competitor for a cheaper price. For as long as Microsoft and Sony are fighting for your time and money, they have to try and beat out each other's prices. So everyone's a winner. Unless you play Nintendo games. Because there's this one company called Nintendo that's been mysteriously absent in all this talk about consoles. Yahoo! And the reason that I've left them out is because they're not really fighting the same battles as these other companies. Because Nintendo is a really weird company. While Sony and Microsoft are out here fighting these crazy battles with huge wads of cash being thrown around left and right, Nintendo's using guerrilla tactics. They're hiding in the undergrowth. They're in the trees, man. Nintendo has a market cap of $52 billion. In terms of sheer firepower, they just cannot compete with Sony, and they certainly can't compete with Microsoft. But Nintendo is Nintendo. They have some of the biggest names in video game history at their disposal. Nintendo's only strategy to competing in the console wars is with exclusives, because there is literally nowhere else that you can play Nintendo games. If you want to play the new Mario game, you have to buy a Nintendo Switch. And Nintendo has such a strong brand image, so much stronger than the other contenders, that they get away with absolute murder when it comes to their console. The Nintendo Switch is flimsy. The dock is made out of cheap plastic and it bends. Its hardware is very weak compared to other consoles, and the performance of games on the Switch suffers because of this. The online service is absolutely abominable. It should be a crime for them to charge you a single penny for such a shitty online service. The Joy-Cons are terrible. So terrible that they literally got sued because of how terrible they are. Nintendo can't do hardware, or software, or marketing. But what they can do is make some seriously good games. And they can put famous faces that we all know and love into these good games. Nintendo's strategy to compete has always been to make some weird gimmick console and to have every Nintendo game ever made be exclusive to Nintendo brand consoles. If you want to play Call of Duty online, you can buy an Xbox or a PlayStation. If you want to play Smash Ultimate online, there's only one place to go, and that's how they get you. So the winner of the console wars is the consumer, but only if that consumer doesn't use Nintendo products. Because Nintendo isn't playing the same game. They don't have to directly compete in the same way that the other consoles do, which means that their prices can be high and their services can be terrible, because they will always get sales anyway, because where else are you going to go to see Mario? The console wars are a funny thing, because what seems super trivial at first is actually extremely important for the consumer, because the moment one of these companies wins, your gaming experience will get a whole lot worse. Thanks for watching.